Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Beyond the Soundbite. It's what I'm calling this new thing that we're doing here. It's where I bring people in about who are interested in interesting and thought-provoking leaders in the libertarian agenda and the liberty movement. And today I've got Steve Kerbel with me today. He's a Libertarian Party candidate for President of the United States, and we're going to be chatting for a little bit with him about his ideas and what he's trying to do and how you can reach out and support him if that's something that you're interested in. And welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason.
It's great.
Great to be here. I appreciate the invitation and very happy to be here.
Well, this is the first time that we've met, and you flew in from Colorado, especially to be here. So I want to tell you how much I appreciate you coming in to do that. And there's some people I'm sure who don't. This is the first time that they're getting a chance to hear from you. So let's start off with you just telling me a little bit about your background, where you come from, why you're here, and what you're doing.
Okay. Well, you know, Jason, I was born in Southern California. The last 20 years I've been in Colorado Springs, Colorado, running insurance businesses. I have been, obviously watching politics from a distance, very interested in what's been going on. I've never been a member of any political party except for now the Libertarian Party. But basically, just from my experience of duking it out in the trenches, in business, it became very apparent to me what kind of damage our out-of-control government is doing to the people, their hopes, their dreams, and their liberties. So I felt, for better or worse, I've always made a lot of noise when I've gotten involved in things. And so I felt it was time for me to get involved to try to really further the cause of liberty, because frankly, I just couldn't stand where we're going as a nation anymore.
So is that what it is then, that you are... Because this isn't about winning, right? This isn't. I mean, it's not. If we move to 3% of the vote as libertarians, that would be earth-shattering in terms of a success in a presidential race. So for you, it's really more about spreading the message? Is it about acquiring new members? Is it about why? Why are you doing it? Because you funded the campaign yourself, right? And I don't mean to keep talking, but you funded the thing yourself. You've been traveling around. Now you've got a really nice group of people who are supporting you and helping you achieve your goals, and you've got donation dollars coming in. But man, why go to all the effort?
Well, it's funny. When I first came into this, of course, always been competitive, so you have to be in it to win it regardless. But you have to recognize the reality as well that, if lightning strikes and we win, well, good for us. And that's actually what we're trying to achieve. But the thing is this, if I can be instrumental in furthering the cause of liberty by having the United States recognize that there is a viable third option other than the Republicans and Democrats, and I move the nation that much farther towards the liberty movement being successful, then I have done what I needed to do. But that being said, I saw a recent report from Rasmussen saying that if it's Trump versus Clinton, then 22% of Americans are voting for somebody else. If that somebody else is us, we're talking about a heck of a lot more than 3 to 5%. We're talking about if we get up to the 20% range and we are in the right place at the right time, who knows? Yeah,
if we've got the right person in there who's speaking the right message, and because one of the things we talked about before the show started was we were talking about the last presidential debate that you guys did in Michigan. It was Michigan, right?
It was Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And, not for nothing, but it just wasn't very well done. And unfortunately, although I think a lot of what you guys talked about during that little exchange was good, the content was really good, more than anything, I think you'd agree too that we've got a real messaging problem, and it's not just about what the message is, but it's the way it's delivered that ultimately is going to be able to move us as an idea into the range where I don't want to, socially acceptable, is that the term? Is that the right one? What would you use?
Well, I would say a part of the mainstream thought is really what it is. And, the Massachusetts debate, I'm very thankful that they put it on, that it was nice to go out there and be able to be seen, and it was a start. And hopefully that catches fire, technology improves, the conditions of delivery improve, all that can get better, but you have to start somewhere. Yeah. And so I'm very much behind getting some very good professional representation for us, as a viable third option in the country. And that's really a very important way we have to go.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about just in general, What do you think is the biggest problem that we face as Americans today politically? Is it political? Is it economic? Is it terrorism? What do you, kind of like, what's your main issue? What's driving you?
You know, it's interesting because when I'm asked that question, I usually give a very long answer because it's not one issue.
It's terribly open-ended, isn't it?
Well, it really is. And the reality is everything, I mean, if you look at the foundations of libertarianism, everything is based upon individual liberty. That's the whole point of everything, whether it's fiscal, political, foreign policy, it's all based on the same desire for individual liberty, and it all ties in together. So there's so many things that are part of that, whether it's the victimless crimes, you know, as far as the drug war, which is just crazy, whether it's, you know, taxation, which is disastrous, you know, as far as taking money from people without any choice to fund programs they don't want and end up causing them more problems in the future, whether it's foreign policy of getting out there and supporting the military-industrial complex by bombing everyone we can. You know, there's so much to fix. And the reality is, if we have the liberty that we should have in this country, that the Founding Fathers recommended and planned for, then ultimately the world would be more peaceful as well.
Well, see, I think that people see, at least the circles that we run in, they agree wholeheartedly with that, but they look around and my listeners say, well, okay, but where do you even start? Because you do have, I mean, the abuses know no bounds. And so if you put yourself in a position, whether it's President of the United States, whether it's a local mayor or a congressperson, where do you start? What is the one thing that helps get the ball rolling? Do you have one?
You have to win. I mean, that's really what it is. I mean, that's what it comes down to, because if we're not in control,
if you don't win, it doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, because then it becomes, you know, we started off with a great mission and much like a think tank.
Yeah.
You know, and my entire goal is to bring our party from theory to practice, because I think you have to be a doer if you want to make things done. You can't just sit around and complain all day long. You've got to do something about it. And so ultimately, if for some reason, you know, the planets align and I win the election in November, then, you know, I'm going to recognize the fact that the voters knew what I wanted to do and supported me because this is what they wanted. And so I'm going to fight as strong as I can within the parameters of Washington, D.C. to deliver what the voters put me there for.
Yeah.
And so you have to start with a massive cut in expenses as far as the overreaching federal government. You have to redo the taxes. It just goes on and on and on and on.
So talking about taxation, I was reading kind of your, I guess it's your mission statement on the website, and it says you want to repeal the income tax and the inheritance tax, and replace it with a fair and equal system based solely on procurement. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. I mean, first of all, you've got to repeal the 16th Amendment before you can bring in anything else. Because let's say if I'm in the office and 4 to 8 years later I'm out, and I've brought in another method of funding the government, but haven't gotten rid of income tax, we're going to be stuck with both. And so you've got to repeal the 16th Amendment first. But ultimately, what I see is we can pretty easily cut $1.1 trillion out of the federal budget very quickly by eliminating duplicitous and basically the federal regulation. That's all it's doing is just making everybody else miserable.
Can you give me an example of that?
Okay, well, without having everybody jump out of their chair, look at the Department of Education. $200 billion a year we're paying to the federal government. We already have the same infrastructure in the cities, the counties, the states. And I'm pretty sure from a lot of experience and discussions I've had, the teachers can't stand the federal regulation.
Right.
So $200 billion, that's gone.
So you just eliminate the Department of Education.
And you bring anything that's still necessary in what they do, and you keep it alive under a different structure. But for the most part, you get rid of it.
So what do you say to the person? Because again, this is really where the messaging breaks down. Because what you get are people who don't have any exposure to our ideas say, oh my gosh, he wants to get rid of, now my kids don't have a public school education anymore, and how are they going to go to school? And you don't want poor kids to go to school and get an education. What's your immediate response to someone who says that to you?
Well, the immediate response is that actually it hampers the education. If you close the federal Department of Education, you don't hamper education. Actually, you enhance it.
How so?
Because remember, you still have the infrastructure of the school boards to manage the education within the cities. You have districts within cities with multiple districts. You have counties and states. You have that infrastructure in place to keep the education going in whatever manner the people of the state choose.
But have you not eliminated the money, or have you just returned the money to the states and now the states are using the capital as they see fit?
Actually, we're just saving the money because schools are funded by property tax right now. So that's a state expense, a county, city, and state expense. So ultimately, eliminating the Department of Education will probably enhance.
You're essentially eliminating the standard, the creator of the standard.
Right.
Yeah.
And that standard is bad.
It's terrible.
I mean, looking at Common Core,
that. Yeah.
that's a horrible thing to do to people. If you look around the country and various beliefs and even colloquialisms and dialects and things like that, you can't expect everyone to have the same standard.
Yeah.
And that's what the federal agencies are promoting, whether it's the Department of Education, Department of Energy, Health and Human Services, and on we go. It's duplicate.
Yeah.
And it's oppressive, and it's expensive.
It's always been amazing to me that people talk about, hey, we have to have this Department of Education, we have to have this form of education because otherwise poor children wouldn't be able to get a good education, and poor kids are entitled to a good education. Everyone's entitled to a good education. And I say to myself, have you ever been down to the inner city? Even here in Kansas City, Kansas City School District, unaccredited. They can't even meet the low bar of federal standards of accreditation.
Right.
And you're talking about how, and meanwhile, the costs go up. We keep spending more money per student, but none of the kids are getting educated. You've got people who are graduating high school who can't read. And you say, well, this is not a system that is hampered by money because the dollars continue to go up. There's something fundamentally broken with the system itself. And it's nice to hear somebody talking about the fact that somebody unafraid of just saying, listen, we just need to get rid of it. It doesn't make sense. There's a better solution.
Well, not to mention federal regulation costs the states a lot of money as well just to comply with it. So essentially, it's just a big mess that makes any of those regulatory entities, it makes whatever they're regulating far more expensive, more cumbersome, less efficient, less effective. And why are we paying for this?
No, I agree with you, but then I'm a sympathetic audience. Talk to me about what's going on in Oregon. That's big in the news right now, and we'll focus just for a minute on that. And tell me, are you in favor of what the militia is doing there, or are you not? And if why or why not?
I prefer peaceful solutions to everything, but the reality is property rights are a foundation of our nation. They should be able to stand up for them. As far as it's far better to do things in a peaceful way if you can. And so I'm not quite sure I would do exactly what they did, but I understand where they're coming from.
So is that a supporting position or a non-supporting position?
It's political. Because here's the thing: I think they should stand up for themselves, but you can't do it in a violent manner.
Okay, so. Do you consider the takeover of a federal building on what the federal government has said is their land to be aggression or violence? Because let's be clear on whether you mean aggression or violence.
Well, actually, both parties are guilty of aggression.
Okay.
The federal government is being aggressive in what they're doing, and the people in Oregon are also being aggressive in what they're doing. I would encourage people to use their words.
Okay. Fair enough. Let's move on to a little foreign policy then and talk about that. That was something we were a little light on when I went and looked at what you had. You said you were in favor of a strong military, a strong national defense. But I read it says that you advocate for American troop withdrawal from as many foreign outposts as possible. Is that a correct statement of yours or a correct ideal that you hold? And if so, what does that mean?
It's correct. What I think is part of the problems that we face as a nation regarding foreign policy and having the enemies that we do is because we're always meddling in the affairs of others. So the way I see a defense should be in this country is a defense where ultimately we have a very strong capability of resisting and any type of attack, such that people are afraid to attack us. But we basically say, as soon as our treaties expire, then you're on your own. Sovereign nations should not be supported by us or defended by us. I didn't raise my children to go die for another country. If we need to defend ourselves, but we need to do it in such an intelligent way and strong way that people aren't going to mess with us. And we can do that by cutting our defense budget in half.
How do you get around, or how do you separate the need for diplomacy without what many would consider to be meddling. What's the difference?
Diplomacy is hopefully a discussion which continues a dialogue. They say keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I think diplomacy is very important, but I don't think we've done that right either. I think that diplomacy should be respectful of the history and needs of who you're talking to, and then it can be a lot more effective. I think that you should always keep the lines of communication open, not to mention free trade works very well with that as well. If everyone's working together, then it's less likely they're going to want to attack each other. So I think you just build up a good, strong defense. You keep the lines of communication open with the rest of the world, but you pretty much let people take care of themselves. And I think that that's actually the key to a peaceful world.
Is the goal always to be neutral then? To always to be in a position where we don't take up sides, where we do not take a stand with one or another? Because if we do, then do we not instantly get accused of meddling and putting our weight behind one group or another group?
Well, my view is that we're not to be isolationists, but we are to be non-interventionists. That's the way I look at it. And so as far as picking and choosing, it's very hard to say, well, if this happens, then I would do this. If this happens, I would do that. And that's actually the military and foreign relations questions are actually some of the most difficult to answer, because they say, well, if this happened during World War II, would you have done the same thing? Yeah. Well, the reality I look at it is, well, I don't know, because if you're at the helm of the nation, you probably have the truth. If you're receiving disseminated information from government and history books and things like that, who knows if you're getting the truth? Yeah. So you have to basically say, look, the plan is to try and be as non-interventionist as we possibly can. I cannot address specific issues because I don't know all the details right now.
Well, and that's an interesting perspective, because it is one that the people try and use frequently, and it's kind of a setup question, because it says, if I paint you into a corner, would you step on the paint to get out? Well, yeah, I would have to, because you've placed me in a period of time where I had no control over previous events or happenings, and like you said, with only a distorted version of what's happened given to me by whoever. And so that's an important point. But I guess one of the things I think that non-libertarians get wrapped up in, even when you talk about Rand Paul, who's running for president as a Republican, is they call him a non-intervention, an isolationist. And it's a common tactic used. So when you differentiate between isolationist and non-interventionist, what is the difference between those two in your mind?
Well, an isolationist basically just is like on an island to themselves and never speaks to anyone else. A non-interventionist still can communicate with the rest of the world, but doesn't try and influence them, try and make regime changes and things like that with ourselves. And I did want to add something else on that same message. One of the big challenges we face as libertarians in getting the message out is recognizing why it is that people don't recognize the other option. What I mean by that is it's marketing. Democrats are scared to death that a Republican's going to win. Republicans are scared to death that a Democrat's going to win. But guess what happens? They do the same thing when they win. And so that's what's hard for people to recognize, is the fact that there's people out there who use terms like Demopublicans and Republicrats and stuff like that. I don't really go that far, but at the same time, I still believe that it's a matter of people opening their eyes, waking up, seeing that ultimately the Republicans and Democrats have gone arm in arm to bring us to where we are today while blaming each other. So sooner or later, people are going to wake up, and that's what we need.
With liberty and justice for all. Every politician elected must swear to uphold liberty. But do they follow through? Liberty is the absence of outside control or oppression over our lives. As long as we are not infringing on the person, property, or natural rights of another, Republicans and Democrats have proven that they are enemies of our liberties. More liberty allows for opportunity, innovation, and human advancement. Less liberty causes economic depression, wrongful imprisonment, and stifled progress. Libertarians believe in the philosophy of liberty. It is time to unite for liberty. It is time to join, contribute, and encourage a libertarian campaign or cause near you. I am libertarian.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. That's one of the things I try and point out on my show every day is most recently the spending bill that got passed by the Republicans. And I remember sitting and having conversations with senatorial candidates 7 years ago, about how they just needed to get control back, and they would fix it. They wouldn't be, when they got power last time, they got greedy and they screwed up, and if they just got authority back, they'd do it right, and they'd reduce taxes, and they'd reduce the budget, and they'd do all of these things, repeal Obamacare, and all this stuff they talked about. And of course, I didn't believe him at the time. I thought it was a bunch of hooey. And sure enough, now, as soon as they get back in a position to do it, the very first thing they do is take us deeper into debt. It seems like it's a different monkey that they've got on their back. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't matter whether you're giving to the oil companies or to alternative energy, that there's a special handout there for you somewhere. Mm-hmm. And I think it is important that people understand that you're getting screwed whether you want to or not, that neither side is really working for your best interest.
That's right.
And the question is, would a libertarian be any different? I mean, if you're elected president, does absolute power corrupt absolutely? Are you going to put yourself in a position where now you have the power, you have the authority, and you have to make concessions on who you are and what you believe in order to get something accomplished?
Yeah, no. Because here's the thing. I mean, I am doing this because I believe that we need a serious correction in our nation. And if I was fortunate enough to end up with the presidency, then I'm not going to forget my mission. I mean, I'm not a political animal. I am a person who loves this country, who believes we got to go back to the vision of the Founding Fathers, and I'm going to do what it takes to get us there. And that's very, very important to me. So no, and not to mention, we don't have a multi-decade history of deals and things like that. I mean, if we're in there, we're fresh, we're new. It's going to take a long time to corrupt.
There's nothing. So. Yeah, you would definitely be an outsider, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about what's going on in the Middle East. You've got many different wars going on there that we were partisan in and starting or facilitating in one form or fashion. And now it's a big mess over there. Mm-hmm. And now you've got armed people here in America. You've got them in France, in Great Britain. You're dealing with massive immigration problems now because of the war and because of the lack of opportunity. If you were elected president of the United States, you're going to be dropped into the middle of that. What's the solution?
The solution is this. It took 70 years of bombing these people for them to get to where they are today. It's going to take another 70 years before they forget the fact that we killed their families. So in the meantime, we have to back away from the intervention. We have to build up our strength. But one key of this that people fail to mention that I think is crucial is protecting those Second Amendment rights. Because here's the thing. If somebody wants to come over and do a mass shooting and everybody's packing, they're not going to get very far. And so ultimately, the formula we're seeing now with our government to say, oh, somebody got shot, let's take away the guns. Let's do this. Executive orders now. Mm-hmm. I heard about it. That's crazy because that's what makes us weak. And so ultimately, we need to stay strong at home while remaining not involved, in those conflicts. But the other thing, too, is we can't really go in and apologize either. We have to basically say, this is our position. We are letting you take care of this on your own. We're taking care of ourselves on our own, and we're going to defend ourselves. Sort it out.
What do you say to the guy who says, well, if you decide to pull out, we went over there, we made a big mess of things, and if you decide just to bring everybody home now, all you're going to get is an ISIS that is stronger and more powerful and is going to take over the region and is one day going to be in a position where they can do real harm to Americans, and we have a chance to stop them now and to protect America now, because this is the argument. This is the argument that Republicans are making. Right. It's even the argument that Hillary Clinton is making. Mm-hmm. The necessity in politics today to be strong on national defense and that strength to be aggressors is paramount, I guess, because you can see it's driving. It's driving Trump. It's driving all of the major political candidates. And what do you say to the guy? How do you overcome that argument when someone brings it to you?
Well, first of all, I mean, I don't really agree that that's what's going to happen. But besides for that, you have to also, you've got to be sane. You've got to take a breath here and recognize that, the Republicans and Democrats, Hillary and Trump and everybody else, they're using the experiential benefit of trying to lead by fear. Fear is a great motivator. You'll give up all your rights. You're not supposed to, but a lot of people are willing to look at the Patriot Act. And so ultimately, you've got to have cooler heads prevail. You've got to stop trying to identify. Remember, the military-industrial complex is huge, and they're paying to get all these guys elected. That's why they're so happy to use not only the armaments that they're buying, but they're also trying to motivate people by fear. So ultimately, what you need to do is you need to let the cooler heads prevail. Like I say, keep the strength at home. And recognize to the people who are being led by fear that they're being led by fear, for one thing. Also, stop trying to identify an entire religion as the problem. And what we're dealing with is a violent gang. ISIS that is doing this, it's a violent gang. It's not a religion. It's not a representation of a religion. It's a violent gang. You need to fight it as you would fight a violent gang. But remember, if the leaders are trying to say, be very, very afraid and keep voting for us and let us spend all your money and fight these guys, they remain in power. So it's kind of a dance to make people understand that. But you have to speak in clear and concise terms, because if you go too far, then you're going to lose them.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, that's as good an answer as I guess anybody can give. Is you just have to be a better communicator. I just it's frustrating to me when we continue, because I have a background in the military, and I spent 5 years there, and so when I talk about the things, I hold a position that's largely the same as yours, that just says simply, just come home. Most of the people who are angry and who are committing these violent atrocities inside of the countries, like the homegrown terrorists, so to speak, are people who are just tired of seeing their families bombed.
Right.
And you can flip the tables on that and say, well, what if Saudi Arabia was bombing every U.S. city for years and years and years? And eventually, would you become very hateful and jaded towards your country?
Of course.
And they're the country you were living in. And I think the answer is yes. So I think a lot of the damage that is being done right now, and a lot of the recruiting efforts that they're having success with, would go away if you just stopped giving them the fuel to breed those new terrorists, to breed those homegrown terrorists. But anyway, that's just my take on it, and I'm not running for president. So I want to read something that came off of your webpage. It has to do with regulation. And I thought you're going to have to explain this one to me.
Okay.
Because it says regulation of industries that serve the consumer should be managed by communities appointed and funded by the industries subject to regulation. Are you suggesting that the independent industries hire people to regulate themselves? And how is that any different than the Washington apparatus we have now, where we have lobbyists who do the same thing?
That's a great question, Jason. Here's the thing. Right now, regulation is very adversarial towards business. And so I guess maybe that was a bit of an olive branch, because really regulation is not necessary in most cases, because we still have people, we still have courts. And so the regulators get involved and they mess everything up. And where the reality is you don't really need them. But at the same time, you have to look at things somewhat incrementally. And so using, let's say, the insurance industry, for example, regulators in the insurance industry just want to get the businesses. That's what they want. They're not helping the consumer at all. All they're doing is destroying consumer choice by pushing businesses out of the way. So ultimately, it would be nice to have just consumers, courts, businesses, whatever. But as an incremental solution, if they could create people who actually have knowledge in the industry that are there to help the consumer, with information.
Wasn't that the original intent of most of the agencies? The rationale behind creating the agencies is, hey, Congress doesn't have this experience, so what we'll do is we'll get industry experts who are neutral third parties, and they will look at the industries and they will regulate them and they will write the regulations so that we can ensure that we're getting accomplished what we need done. I mean, I get if it's an olive branch and you're saying, hey, here's a happy medium. How is that different than what we started out having here? I mean, is your ultimate goal to get rid of all regulation, period? Or is there some regulation that you are still in favor of that needs to happen?
I would like to get rid of as much of it as we can, without being able to list line by line what needs to come and go. I would say ultimately it's not a necessary evil. And the regulation that I was talking about probably is a little bit more of consumer assistance than regulation, because regulators are very happy to say, okay, we don't like what you've done, so we're going to get the Attorney General to sue you. Well, that's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I'm talking about bureaus to assist the consumer, to help with disputes or to information and things like that.
You're talking about advocacy groups.
Perhaps, yeah. We're not talking about actual regulation in that case. It seems to me that we need to stop the adversarial relationship between regulators and business because it destroys jobs, it destroys lives, it hurts the consumers and the businesses. And we got to pay for it through forcible taxation.
Okay. What's the biggest messaging problem that, and we'll close it out like this, we'll talk a little bit about messaging because I think it's just so critical. We have 1 year left before the election. And I think, as I said before, I think if libertarians going to the ballot box accounted for 3 to 5% of the vote, that'd just be massive for us. We would just be jumping for joy. And I want to figure out, and the entire purpose of you being here and me having the show that I have is to do a better job of messaging. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that today. I'm sure that if you're people who are hardcore big government folks are not going to agree with us on a lot of things.
Never do.
But I think that anybody who addresses it with an open mind can look at what you said and say, you know what, okay, maybe I don't bite off on all of that, but at least the guy is coherent. At least he sounds intelligent. And there may be some validity to what he's saying. Yeah, you're right. I do live in the inner city and my school system sucks. Mm-hmm. All this money hasn't helped me. But what do you think that the Libertarian Party, let me ask it this way. Can you tell I'm a really good interviewer?
You're doing fine.
I am. The Libertarian Party's been around, 40 years now?
Mm-hmm, a little over.
There's been almost no movement at all in growth in the party. I am of the opinion there is a massive messaging problem. Mm-hmm. Do you agree? What is it and how do we fix it?
It's a couple prongs to it. Yes, huge messaging problem. First of all, you can ask a number of Americans about the Libertarian Party. A lot of them are going to say, who? Others are going to say, oh, those guys, and they'll quote the wrong message. That's not what we stand for. It's really important for people to recognize the fact that the root of libertarian is liberty. It's not all the crazy stuff that people are talking about. All it is we're born with natural rights, freedoms, things like that. We should be able to live our lives without government being involved in everything. So messaging, it's two parts of it. First of all, the message to the people has to be clear and concise. It has to make sense. It has to be something that they can understand and comprehend. And then we have problems within our own group because we have several caucuses within our party, and we're always fighting about what happens when we're down to a certain level of government instead of all working together to get to that level and then argue about how much we want later.
Right.
So one of my missions in this campaign also is to unify the party. You know, whether you're an anarcho-capitalist, whether you're a radical, whether you're a moderate, whether you're anything else within the group, respect those people, recognize their input is valuable. Keep all of us together on this team to get the message out. Because, I use the analogy of an elevator. Right now, we're on the 100th floor of a skyscraper, which is crazy out of control, huge government that controls everything you do and listens to everything you do. The ground floor is complete anarchy, no government whatsoever. We can pretty much agree we want to go to the 10th floor. After that, we're all fighting, right? So why don't we all stick together, get that elevator going down to the 10th floor. When we get there, let's talk about it then.
I couldn't agree more with that statement, but here's the question that I have for you is what do you think, and sometimes I get a little bit of flack because people think I'm hard on ANCAPs, which I'm really not. I'm more hard on people that I think are self-damaging to the idea. Mm-hmm. So they'll say, for example, well, because you're not in favor of no government, then I can't support you. Or because you're in favor of some taxation, well, then you're not a real libertarian. And in my mind, I've always thought about it the same way. The elevator analogy is excellent, but I've always said we're all on the same bus. We all are going in the same direction. It's just a question of where along the route we all want to get off.
Right.
But we got a long way to go. So why don't we all get together, stop nitpicking and fighting with each other. Let's roll with it. Mm-hmm. And if we get to a point where you think you've gotten far enough, then you can talk about getting off the bus. But there's no reason to argue amongst ourselves right now. But it seems like there's so much of that. I just even saw when Gary Johnson just announced that he's going to be competing with you for the nomination, and I read some of the posts underneath his announcement, vitriolic from people who are libertarians. And is there a way? How are you going to unify? How are you going to bring people together?
Just the message what we're talking about. Recognize our common denominators first, and respect the discussions you have. I mean, I've had discussions with people of all views within our party. I listen. I try and understand where they're coming from, and I try and see, is there something I can learn from this discussion? You know, the problem is that if you insult someone, they're not going to join your team. So it's a matter of recognizing the common denominator and the strengths we have together, making that vocal to such a way that people really understand that, look, we are on the same team, even though we don't agree with every last detail. Yeah. That's how you keep them together. It's respect. That's all it is.
Well, I'm really excited to see how the rest of the election cycle goes for you. I wish you the best of luck. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks very much, Jason.
In the U.S., we seem to only talk about two political parties. Don't like taxes? Republican. Want more social programs? Democrat. But the fact is, there are a ton of political philosophies and affiliations out there. One of these is libertarianism, and it has grown increasingly popular over the past few elections. If you've never heard of it, that's fine. A recent poll found that even amongst self-described libertarians, nearly a quarter of them had no idea what the word meant. So what exactly is libertarianism? Well, the most well-known version is the one that grew out of the 1960s counterculture movement in the US. In short, the libertarian philosophy says that everybody should have absolute freedom to live their lives how they see fit, as long as they respect everybody else's right to do the same. This generally means that most libertarians advocate for minimalist government on the basis that it should have no say whatsoever in the decisions a person makes about his or her personal life. This is a pretty Republican-leaning ideal. At the same time, libertarians stress social freedoms like the right to gay marriage and abortion. In a nutshell, libertarianism appeals to people because it combines both political worlds. That may be why the Libertarian Party has been called the third largest party by both membership and popular vote in the US. If lower taxes, legalized marijuana, and the freedom to do whatever you reasonably want sounds good in theory, it might just be the one for you.